Chapter 1521. Isn't that akin to incest? When the thought surfaced in Thomas's head, he said seriously, "That's why I want to talk about the divorce between them." The Lovegood were rather surprised when they heard what Thomas had said. After all, Thomas had been someone who knew what to do and what not to do. However, Aaron was not going to agree with him this time. "Elder Master Clifford, do you think the marriage between our two families is a child's play?" Thomas tapped the foot of the glass rhythmically, and it took him a while before he replied, "Aaron, there are many other ways to maintain the relationship between our two families." He looked at Violet and continued. "That's why I've decided to take Viv in as my god-granddaughter." "What? Are you kidding me?" Aaron rose to his feet and shouted back to Thomas, despite everyone watching him, "If you take Viv as your god-granddaughter, does this not mean that she and Jackie will become brother and sister instead of husband and wife? Don't you think it's ridiculous?" Thomas raised his head slowly and said calmly, "So, are you going to let your daughter continue to cause more scandals and live in protest? Is that what you want?" Aaron was stumped. Thomas continued and said, "Aaron, you're too stubborn. Have you forgotten the tragedy that happened that year? Have you forgotten how your daughter has become what she is today?" Violet looked at Thomas in surprise. How did he know about the things that happened that year? Aaron placed his hands on the table and clenched them tightly. His expression was dark. The meal between the two families did not go well, and it ended with Aaron's departure. Maisie and Nolan returned to their room. From their conversation, they could see that Aaron was reluctant to talk about the thing that had happened that year. "Nolan." She turned around and approached him. "What should I do?" "I'm inquisitive about it." Nolan chuckled as he took off his watch. "What are you curious about?" "I'm curious about Violet's past." Nolan picked her up and put her on the table. He placed both his arms around her and leaned closer. With a smile tugging at the corner of his lips, he said, "It seems like my wife is really gossipy." Maisie leaned toward the back and said half-heartedly, "So? You don't like me anymore?" Nolan cupped her chin with his hand and planted a kiss on her. "When have I ever said that I don't like you anymore?" She wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "You've gone ahead and looked into the matter yourself, so how can you say I'm gossipy?" He chuckled. "How did you know about that?" Maisie lifted her eyebrows. In fact, she only learned about it today. When she saw Daisy coming out of the study room, she overheard his conversation with Thomas as she passed by the study room. She stretched his collar and said, "I didn't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation. You should blame the study room for having poor sound insulation." Nolan laughed and caressed the corner of her lips with his finger. He lowered his head to kiss her and said, "Then, don't you think you should give me something in return?" In the meantime, in the study room, Violet couldn't believe it as she looked at the divorce papers on the desk. She lifted her head to look at Thomas, who was standing in front of the window, and asked, "Grandpa, do you really agree with this?" Clasping his hands behind his back, Thomas sighed. "I know those scandals are just a form of protest against your father." He turned around slowly and continued. "Viv, I've always known that you're a good girl. Otherwise, I wouldn't have agreed with your father when he came to talk to me about the marriage. I'm sorry. I should have considered it more carefully. I thought you and Jackie could get along very well." Chapter 1522. Are you mad at me? Violet clenched her fists tightly and shook her head as she smiled. "I know you only want the best for me, so I'm not mad at you." When she thought about it, she was the one who owed Thomas something. "Thank you, Viv," Thomas said as he smiled gently at her. "Don't worry. Even if you get a divorce, you will be my god-granddaughter. Even though you and Jackie can't be husband and wife, you can treat each other as brother and sister. I think it should be better, right?" Violet pressed her lips thin. After a short bout of hesitation, she said, "Honestly, this is all my fault. Grandpa, you shouldn't blame him as well. Jackie hated her because he thought she was that kind of woman. She had never cared about how others thought of her. That's why she had thrown caution into the wind and had done so many stupid things to the point that she had overlooked how good Thomas was to her. It was only now she realized how stubborn she was. Even now, Thomas was worried about her, and she felt even guiltier. I know. None of you has done anything wrong. I just don't want you to end up like me, Thomas lamented. When he was young, he had been ambitious and sought nothing but profits. However, Simone's death had woken him up completely. He had been living in the midst of revenge and guilt for Simone. It was not like he hadn't done anything wild or stupid before. He had even sought revenge against the wrong person. Aaron was Violet's father. Even though Violet resented her father for what he had done, she did not choose to take revenge on him. Instead, she had chosen to punish herself. She was such a good and kind girl, so how was there any chance he could bring himself to blame her? When Violet came out of the study room, she raised her head and saw Jackie standing in the corridor. Lowering her head, she walked over and stopped in front of him. I've signed the divorce papers. After she finished speaking, she paused for a few seconds before adding, I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused you guys this whole time. Jackie was stunned. He was kind of surprised that Violet would apologize to him. After all, she had never said something like that to him so sincerely. He let out a scoff and said nonchalantly, I didn't know that you know how to apologize as well. Violet knew he wouldn't accept her apology. She crossed her arms in front of her chest. When she thought that he still couldn't get rid of her even though they had gotten a divorce, a hint of triumph crossed her eyes. Well, even after we've gotten a divorce, we'll become siblings. So, consider it a little favor that I did for you, my brother. After that, she strode away. Jackie turned his head around to look at her, and it was only now that he realized she was so childish. Everything she did was unpleasant, but the good thing was that she knew what she was doing, so she wasn't too bad after all. It was considered a relief for both of them as well now that Thomas had asked them to get a divorce. However, when Jackie thought that his wife had become his sister, he let out a scoff as he found it ridiculous. In the afternoon, Jackie and Violet finalized their divorce procedure in the city hall. After that, they came out of the city hall one after another. Violet stood in front of the car and waited for him. Hey, my dear brother. He was opening the door and froze. He frowned slightly, and it was apparent that he hadn't gotten used to the sudden change of identity yet. Call my name. He went into the car. Just when Violet was about to open the door, she found that the door was locked from the inside. She knocked on the window and asked the driver to roll down the window. After the window had rolled down, she put her hand on the edge of the window, leaned forward, and looked at the people inside. What do you mean by that? Are you going to leave me here after the divorce? Jackie placed his hand on his forehead and glanced at her. I'm sure there are a lot of men who want to come and pick you up, my dear sister. Chapter 1523. Jackie patted the driving seat and signaled the driver to start the engine. Without waiting for Violet to say anything, the car drove away. Violet shouted exasperatingly, You're right. There are a lot of men who want to come here and pick me up. I don't even want to sit in your car. She pulled her phone out. As she browsed her contact list, she discovered that there were not many people she could ask. Her car was inside the garage of her house, and she had not brought her purse when she came out to the city hall to finalize their divorce procedure. Her phone was not linked to any cards, and she did not expect that Jackie would be so cruel as to leave her behind. She thought Jackie would treat her better after they got a divorce, but it now seemed to her that she was too naive. She did not have other choices anymore, so she called her mother. However, she did not know that someone secretly captured the scene of them coming out of the city hall and Jackie leaving her behind on camera. The next day, Thomas threw the magazine on the table, his expression dark. This is what you promised me? Jackie looked at the magazine. It was the image of them going to the city hall yesterday for a divorce. They had promised Thomas they wouldn't make their divorce public. However, little did they expect that paparazzi would follow them. Now the media speculated they had gotten a divorce. Jackie pressed his lips tightly, and it took him a while before answering. The media would find out sooner or later, so I don't think it'll affect anything. After all, his grandfather was going to tell the public that he was going to take Violet in as his god-granddaughter. Thomas's face sank, and he asked, "You don't think it'll affect anything, but have you thought about Viv?" "Yes, I agreed to let both of you get a divorce, but I also said before that you can't make your divorce public before I announce that I'm going to make Violet my god-granddaughter. Look at what you've done now. Have you ever thought about what the media is going to say about Violet because of this?" If the divorce between him and Violet was confirmed, the media would certainly think that he had terminated their marriage because of Violet's misconduct. This would have a big impact on her reputation in the future. Even if Violet did not care about it, there was no way the Lovegood would swallow the bitter pill of humiliation. Jackie chuckled and asked, "Grandpa, what exactly did the Lovegood offer you? Don't you think you're a little bit too good to their daughter?" Thomas was stunned. "What? It's already ridiculous enough that you would take Violet in as your god-granddaughter." Jackie stuck his hands into his pockets. "Besides, do you think she cares about her reputation? No matter what the media says about her, even if it isn't real, you can't deny the fact that she ruined her reputation with her own hands. She doesn't even care about it, so why do you have to care about it for her?" "Jackie," shouted Thomas. Meanwhile, Maisie and Nolan came downstairs. Both of them looked at each other and came to the living room. Then, they saw the magazine that had captured them coming out of the city hall on the table. It had only been a day, and the magazine had already been printed. If Violet went out today, she would certainly be surrounded by reporters. Jackie did not say anything anymore because his grandfather had gotten angry. He turned around and left. Maisie stretched her arm to stop him and said, "Can I have a second with you?" Maisie and Jackie stood in the corridor outside. Jackie knew what she wanted to talk to him about, so he said, "If you want to talk about the things between Violet and me, then save your breath. We've gotten divorced, and I don't want to know anything about her. I'm not going to tell you either." Maisie squinted. "I just want you to know that you don't have to have a prejudice against her. She has never done anything that harms the Clifford. It's fine if you don't know about the whole story, but you're in no position to comment on what kind of person she is." Jackie frowned. "She has never harmed the Clifford? She brought disgrace to the Clifford. She brought disgrace to the Clifford? Are you sure? Everyone is just criticizing her for what she did. Has anyone talked about or commented on you?" Chapter 1524. Maisie continued calmly. "Both of you were forced into marriage. You think it's a disgrace to the Clifford after marrying her. However, the reality is that everyone pitted the Clifford for letting such a woman into their home." She took a deep breath. "The only person who really suffers from criticism is Violet. Everyone will only laugh at her. She doesn't care about it because it's the result she wants. Long before you two got married, she had been doing everything she could to ruin her reputation. You're not satisfied with the marriage, and you're not happy with her being your wife. Do you think she's happy with the arrangement? Now that you're divorced, for her, it's the result that she has ever wanted in the first place. In the end, she's the stupid one. And you're right about one thing. She's the one who ruined her own reputation, and she doesn't care about it. But are you sure there are women in this world who don't care about their reputation? She wouldn't understand Violet's intent to ruin her reputation if she didn't know exactly what had happened to Violet. It was not that Violet did not care about her reputation. It was just that her heart was dead. Her heart was dead, and she had no attachment to the world. She was just living her life like a walking corpse. As for her father, he was the proprietor who caused the disaster and made her lose the love of her life. However, not only did he not reflect on his mistake, but he also arranged all kinds of marriages for her. Truth be told, Maisie felt that she was rather tough. If she weren't that tough, she might have ended her life. Nobody knew the things that had happened to her. Everyone was just looking at the surface and thought she was that kind of woman. She turned a blind eye to the controversy, criticism, mockery, and contempt that everyone threw at her. However, no one knew how much she was disappointed in the world. Jackie stood silently. He did not say anything in return. Maisie lowered her head and said, "Since you guys have gotten a divorce, you should stop being so harsh on her." She turned around and entered the living room, leaving Jackie to stand in the corridor alone. Violet did not know that the media would capture a photo of them appearing in the city hall on camera. As soon as she came out of the hotel, reporters surrounded her. "Miss Lovegood, we heard that you've gotten a divorce with Mr. Clifford. Is it because of those scandals you had some time ago? Miss Lovegood, can you tell us the details of your divorce?" The reporters' questions might sound like normal questions on the surface, but Violet knew what they wanted to know. She was certain they were asking if the Clifford abandoned her due to her indecency. Looking at the camera and microphone in front of her, Violet replied without batting an eye. "So what if I get a divorce? It's none of your business." She wanted to leave, but the reporters did not give her the chance. One of them threw an ill-intent question at her. "The Clifford think you have too many scandals, right? That's the reason Mr. Clifford decided to get a divorce with you." Violet coldly looked at the reporter who threw her the question and said, "My scandals have nothing to do with my divorce. Aren't you guys just trying to say I've been abandoned? But I don't care what you guys think, and I can do whatever I want." She pushed the reporters away and walked forward. Suddenly, she heard someone calling her whore, and she stopped in her tracks. She turned her head to look at the crowd and scoffed coldly, "That's right. I'm a whore." After that, she pulled the door open and went into the car. On the internet, whenever it was about the divorce between Violet and Jackie, the comment sections would be filled with many #h comments. Hashtag if she hadn't misbehaved herself, would she get disowned by the Clifford? Hashtag she has cheated on her husband so many times, yet her husband is okay with it. Hashtag how much does it cost to sleep with her? Hashtag inside the car. Violet read through the comments, one after another without any expression on her face. Chapter 1525. In the end, Violet switched off her phone so that she wouldn't get affected by it. Since the reporters had twisted her words, Violet was branded with labels, such as whore and arrogant bitch, once the magazine was published. She was subjected to online bullying right after New Year's Eve. Everyone thought that Violet was a loose woman. Not only did she not admit her mistake, but she also treated the reporters arrogantly after her divorce. There were all sorts of comments about her on the internet, and most of them were bad. In the meantime, the publishing company received a call from Thomas. Nobody knew what Thomas had said, but the owner of the publishing company ran into the department and asked, "Where are the 5,000 copies of the magazine printed yesterday? It's all been distributed." The owner's expression changed, and he said, "Hurry up and call them back. Withdraw those magazines. They can't be distributed. If not, bad things will happen." Everyone in the department worked all morning, and they only got back 3,000 copies of the magazine. There were about 1,000 copies that other people had already bought. The owner of the publishing company scratched his head in frustration. He planned to boost the sales of these magazines during the holiday, but he did not expect Thomas to stand up for Violet. He was aware of how powerful the Clifford were in Octavia. It was just that he thought the Clifford wouldn't care about Violet anymore after she got a divorce from Jackie. He asked, "Who bought the remaining 1,000 copies of the magazine?" "It's the Potters," his staff replied. The owner of the publishing company fell silent. "The Potters? Isn't she the one who had a fight with Violet?" Penelope was the one who had bought the remaining 1,000 copies of the magazine. She contacted other publishing companies specializing in exposing other people's scandals and printed another 4,000 copies of the magazine for distribution. She wanted to banish Violet into oblivion. Violet hadn't gone home for 2 days. When Rose went to the Clifford mansion and asked if they had seen Violet or not, Thomas was stunned. "She hasn't returned home yet?" Rose shook her head. "Not yet. She didn't even pick up my call. I'm worried if it's because of the news in the past 2 days. Thomas thought for a while and looked at Jackie. Jackie, you should go and look for her. Why should I? Jackie said flatly, do you think it's appropriate for me to look for her if she's staying at another person's house? Thomas's face sank. It went without saying that he knew the other person. Jackie was talking about another man. Rose looked at Jackie and said, Jackie, Violet isn't that kind of woman. She doesn't have a lot of friends after her return from overseas. She doesn't have friends? Jack scoffed. She has been rumored to have seen a lot of people behind my back. Are they not her friends? Jackie. Thomas shouted, even if you don't like Viv, both of you are already divorced. There's no need to defame her. Am I the one who defamed her, or she's the one who defamed herself? I'm sure you know that better than me. He took his jacket and walked toward the outside. Meanwhile, Daisy came into the room with Zafir. Great-grandpa, we know where Aunt Violet is. When Rose saw Zafir, she was stunned. Zafir? Zafir nodded at her. Auntie. Thomas looked at them and asked, you guys know where she is? Daisy pointed at Zafir and smiled. Zeph said he knows where she is. Zafir, did Violet contact you? Asked Rose. Nope, she didn't contact me, replied Zafir. It's just that I know her better, and there is only one place that she would go. Rose was stunned. At the St. Maria orphanage, Violet was sitting in the courtyard, teaching the kids how to fold a paper crane. The dean of the orphanage came over and called out to her. Viv, she put the paper crane on her hand and slowly rose to her feet. Yeah? The dean smiled gratefully when she saw how happy Violet was with the kids. Thank you for staying with them these 2 days. They are very happy. Chapter 1526. Violet lowered her gaze and gave off a smile. Actually, I didn't do much. I just taught them to make paper cranes, stars, and more. Those are what Jacob taught me before. The dean approached her and took her hand. Viv, I've always known that you couldn't let go of Jacob. Jacob was a good man. It's a pity that. She interrupted the dean abruptly. Please stop, ma'am, please stop. Viv, you must learn to face the facts. The dean took a deep breath and could not help but feel downcast. There's no need for you to put all the blame on yourself. At that moment, the already cracked dam in Violet's heart was being slammed again, and it crumbled. She lowered her head and admitted deep down that she was not as strong as she had been portraying herself throughout all these years. Despite how others misunderstood and badmouthed her over the years, she had never cared. The only thing that would shatter her was Jacob. She could not bear it any longer. The pain that had been buried deep in her heart for a long time erupted all at once. The dean hugged her distressingly, and her eyes were bloodshot too. Viv, you need to let him off your mind. I can't do so. She choked on her own tears and words, shook her head, hugged the dean tightly, and sobbed. If even I were to forget about him, no one else in the world would remember him anymore. He's dead because of me. The dean was heartbroken. Jacob had grown up in the orphanage. He did not have any background, and the dean was the one who took care of him when he was a child. To her, Jacob was like her biological son. Jacob was very obedient and sensible. He was also a happy-go-lucky boy who loved to laugh and treated others gently. He had been kind all his life, but unfortunately, his relationship with Violet did not end well. Aaron believed an orphan was not worthy of his daughter, so he secretly hindered their relationship and even used his daughter's life, planning a kidnapping incident. He originally wanted to use this event, thinking that he would be able to force Jacob into revealing his true colors. As long as Jacob was afraid of dying and left Violet behind, Violet would definitely give up on him. Alas, he had underestimated Jacob's feelings for Violet, and the kidnapping incident ended up being a catastrophe. The kidnappers Aaron had hired did not keep their promises and asked for a larger amount of ransom, but Aaron did not agree. Thus, they put on their game face and threatened to kill Violet. However, Jacob blocked a bullet for Violet and died right under her nose. The dean patted Violet's back lightly, and Violet could not stop crying. The pain and grievances that had been buried underneath her disguise gushed out all at once. The dean raised her head when she was about to console Violet and saw Jackie standing outside the door. No one knew how long he had been there, he only entered the room after he was discovered. The dean reminded Violet of something, and Violet stopped crying, looked back at Jackie, and wiped away her tears immediately. "What are you doing here? Your mother thought you had gone missing." Jackie glanced at the children sitting at the table, folding paper cranes, and those children stared at him curiously. He paused for a few seconds, and his tone softened. "Grandpa asked me to come out and search for you." Violet sighed. "I'll go back by myself as soon as I've had enough fun." She then went into the room to calm herself down. The dean naturally knew who Jackie was. "Young Master Clifford, Viv has made you worry. I'll apologize to you on her behalf." During normal times, Jackie would not have accepted the apology. Whenever someone did something wrong and needed someone else to apologize on her behalf, he would only think that the person was not accountable and would not admit her mistake. But seeing her in the orphanage, shedding her tough disguise for the first time, and crying heartbrokenly, it was really inappropriate for him to say any hurtful words at that moment. Thus, he responded with a faint hum. "It's okay." He then turned around, looked at those children, and asked after a long time, "Does she come to the orphanage often?" The dean paused for a split second and then replied slowly, "Yes, Viv comes here occasionally whenever she's free, and she'll stay with the children for quite some time. The children here like her very much too." Chapter 1527. Jackie remained silent for a moment. "Did she come here before this?" "Yes, what's wrong?" "It's nothing." He lowered his gaze, and thought about it for a while, but received a call at the moment. It was about the things that he had asked someone else to investigate for him. The other party said, "Mr. Clifford, I've asked Mr. Eden about the other day. He told me that he's not very close with Miss Lovegood. He's only met her twice, and he doesn't even have her contact information. He also said that he happened to run into Miss Lovegood in the restaurant the other day. Miss Lovegood only invited him to have a meal on the grounds that they had had a conversation at an art exhibition." Jackie did not say anything and hung up the call. Someone tugged the hem of his jacket all of a sudden. He lowered his head. It was a little girl of 7 or 8 years old. "Sir, are you here for Sister Viv?" Jackie frowned. This imp actually called me sir, but addressed her as Sister Violet. "Just how old do I look on the outside?" He took a deep breath, squatted down to look at her, and asked, "What's wrong?" The girl asked, "Then will you be nice to Sister Viv?" He paused for a bit and pursed his lips. "Sir, Sister Viv is very nice. So, don't bully her. She also taught us how to make paper cranes and stars, write, draw, and play the piano. We'll be angry if you bully her." Jackie's eyes moved. "I won't bully her." "Pinky promise, you have to keep your word." The girl stretched out her little finger. He was stunned once again, but he then laughed, stretched out his little finger, and made a deal with the little girl. Pinky promise. Violet sat in the room where Jacob lived before his death. The dean had not stopped cleaning it over the years, so the room had always been kept in its original look as if Jacob was still living. There were drawing canvases in the room. Jacob liked to draw, and he was very talented at drawing. Because of this, Violet went to learn how to draw and held an art exhibition for him. She reached out and stroked the portrait that he left behind. She was the model in the portrait. The door was knocked. She returned to her senses, pulled down a cloth to cover the canvas, walked to open the door, and was astonished when she saw Jackie standing beside the dean. The dean turned to Jackie and said, "Then I shall leave her to you. You should talk." After the dean left, Violet stood at the doorway, blocking the entrance, and asked, "Why haven't you left?" He replied indifferently, "I did tell you that I'm here to pick you up." She was startled. And didn't I tell you I'll return when I've had enough fun? Jackie glanced across the gap between her and the door. Let's go in and talk. Isn't there a space in the hall? If you want to talk, let's go to the hall. She reached out, pushed him away, and closed the door. But Jackie pushed the door open abruptly and squeezed himself into the room. Violet was stunned and became furious instantly. Jackie Clifford, what do you think you're doing? Jackie ignored her obstruction, stepped into the room, and looked around. There were plenty of vivid paintings, ordinary but delicate and romantic small gifts, and paper cranes that had been tied onto strings hanging on the wall. These paper cranes had been accumulated over all those years and represented the things one had missed in life. Thinking of what the dean had said to him, he suddenly scoffed coldly. Childish. Violet was already furious because he barged into the room without her permission, but when she heard the word coming from him, she lost her head and pushed him. Who are you calling childish, and who permitted you to come in? Get out. Jackie grabbed her wrist. Aren't you the childish one here? You're not only childish, but also ridiculously stupid. You've done all sorts of things to ruin your reputation only because of a man. I don't see you as someone who's going against the world, but someone who's degenerating willfully. He was telling the truth, but it sounded extremely shrill to her. Chapter 1528. Violet's shoulders quivered. She jerked her hands to break free from his grasp and glared at him with bloodshot eyes. So what if I've chosen to degenerate? Then what have you achieved? He looked extremely calm. Have you gotten what you want in exchange for your degeneration? After doing everything you've done to ruin your reputation, has the dead come back to life? Violet's eyelashes trembled slightly, her lips were pursed tightly, and the hands that were hanging beside her body tightened subconsciously. How can the dead come back to life? Although I hope so, how could there be such a miracle? What happened has happened. I witnessed Jacob's death with my own eyes, and I was also there the day he was cremated. I was personally there throughout the whole journey, sending him off to the other world, but I couldn't change anything. If I could go back in time and go through everything all over again, I'd rather that I was the one who died in that incident. After a long silence, she lowered her head and wiped away the tears that had welled up in her eyes, and her voice sounded hoarse. That's none of your business. Jackie gazed at her and said nothing. In fact, he did not care about what Violet had experienced and did not want to care. Even though he had learned everything, all he had in mind was that she was a childish idiot. She had ruined her reputation and lived a life full of degeneration for the sake of a dead person, so instead of sympathizing with her, he might as well sympathize with the person who had died in her place. If he died for you only because he wanted you to live like who you are today, it'd be better for you to straight up die in the first place. Violet's heart skipped a beat and stopped all of a sudden. Jackie approached her. Have you ever thought about his sacrifice? Was it worth it if the person that he saved was you? His choice back then has resulted in such an outcome. Would he be disappointed to see you acting like this? Violet's breathing stopped for a while, and her straight back gradually stiffened. It was as if she saw Jacob standing beside her, and the faint smile on his tender face was still as gentle as it used to be. Viv, do take good care of yourself when I'm not around. Please don't cry. I'll feel bad. And please do your best to forget me. She lowered her head. Even if she had been trying her best to hold back her tears, she could not stop them from gushing out of her eyes like water torrents that had broken through a dam. The dean stood outside the door and heard Violet's loud cry through the ajar door, and she covered her mouth as her eyes turned bloodshot again. In fact, she also hoped that Violet could bury Jacob in the past, move on, and live happily. After all, this was Jacob's wish too. It was not until the afternoon that Violet and Jackie left the orphanage. She stood in the courtyard and bid goodbye to the dean and the children. A girl asked her, Sister Viv, will you still come to see us in the future? Violet nodded and forced a smile. Of course. The girl suddenly motioned her to come forward mysteriously, so Violet leaned closer to her. The girl then whispered, "Sister Viv, if that uncle dares to bully you, you must tell us. We'll surely avenge you when we grow up." Violet was stunned for a few seconds, then rubbed the girl's hair and laughed. "Don't worry." She waved to them, walked to the car, and the bodyguard opened the door for her. The car then drove away slowly. At the Clifford Manor, Rose and Thomas were sitting in the living room, waiting for the news until the butler hurried in. "Elder Master, young Master Clifford has brought Miss Lovegood back." Rose stood up and saw Violet follow Jackie into the living room in the blink of an eye. Rose walked toward her immediately, and because she had been worried, she was relieved to see that her daughter was fine. Thomas nodded. "Good to see you home." Violet nodded at them and bent over. "I'm sorry I made you worry." Rose hugged her, cried, and laughed at the same time. "Violet, don't you know that you should call me whenever you go anywhere? I was worried to death." Chapter 1529. Violet lowered her gaze. "Over the years, while I've hated my father for Jacob's death, I've ignored my mother's love for me too. In the end, all my relatives could only condone my doings helplessly. All I could think of all these years was my hatred and resentment toward the world, so much so that I've neglected the fact that there are people who care about me. I can't let go of my grudge, because I can't live on happily due to Jacob's death. Before today, I didn't understand Jacob's intention when he saved me from the bullet. He didn't die on my behalf just to make me live in guilt for the rest of my life." 2 days later, in front of all the media, Thomas made the news public that he had taken Violet in as his god-granddaughter. He also clarified that Violet and his grandson had decided to get a divorce not because of Violet's lifestyle, but because of their incompatibility. He supported Violet publicly and accused the media of misinterpreting the truth. And Thomas's decision to come forward and support Violet in person shut all online haters up. The news pushed Violet onto the trending list of Google Trends. And the Dean of St. Maria Orphanage even issued a statement for Violet. Soon, it was revealed that Violet had been holding art exhibitions and secretly carrying out public welfare activities. Violet had never used her name for all the donations and public welfare activities she had contributed to. She had always donated all her earnings to all sorts of organizations under the name of Jacob's Art Studio. Thus, no one knew that the owner behind Jacob's Art Studio was Violet. No one knew that the ignorant and dissolute daughter of the Lovegood would have such artistic talent. Jacob's Art Studio ushered in the highest number of visitors it had ever experienced at the end of the year. All portraits and oil paintings in the exhibition, be it a character or scenery, seemed to have been given fresh meanings and lives. Maisie and Nolan came to the art studio, and they were happy for Violet when they saw that there were quite a lot of guests visiting the exhibition gallery. Nolan wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "You can rest assured now, can't you?" "Yeah," she said as she turned to look at Nolan. "After this incident, I think I'm very lucky. I'm lucky that Nolan has always been here with me." Nolan laughed. "Do elaborate more on that." "I'm thinking, if you were to have died back then, would I inherit your wish and live on as Violet does?" Jacob's Art Studio, as the name suggests, Jacob has always been her inspiration. Jacob might be gone, but Violet has inherited his dream and passion and has opened an art studio with his name. Although not everyone knows much about him, to Violet, he was an existence that can never be erased. Perhaps this is the only thought that can support Violet through the rest of her life. Nolan held her tightly in his arms and rested his chin on the top of her head. "I'm also glad that God didn't make me leave you behind back then. No one would know what would happen tomorrow, so one could only cherish the people that appeared, existed, and passed by one's life." Violet was occupied from morning to night. All the staff of the exhibition hall had already gotten off work, and she was the only person who stayed behind to frame all the paintings. It was raining heavily outside the window. Violet stopped what she was doing, got up, walked to the windowsill, and closed the window. The figure projected on the window pane startled her. She turned around only to see Jackie standing at the door, and she breathed a sigh of relief. What are you doing standing at the door without saying a word? You almost scared the crap out of me. Jackie crossed his arms. Only those who've done bad things will be scared. You're all mouth. Violet was so angry. I'm the only one left in the whole gallery. The corridors were all pitch black, and someone suddenly appeared behind me. Who wouldn't be scared by that? Chapter 1530. Violet walked to the table. What's the matter? It's nothing. He walked in and glanced at the framed paintings on the wall. I've come to visit your gallery. She was startled. Then why not come during the day? He retracted his gaze. I don't have time during the day. Violet snorted, lowered her head, and continued to frame the painting on hand. You actually chose to come to visit at night, that's so sickening. Jackie looked at her and frowned. Watch your words, I've always been like this. Violet thought of something and suddenly realized something. Oh, because I'm now your godsister, I have to respect you as an elder brother, right? Jackie smiled. Grandpa asked us to get along well as god-siblings. Is this how you uphold your promise? Violet smiled. Even retards won't believe in the promise that we both made. Let me ask you a question, will you get along well with me? Jackie was rendered speechless. Violet waved her hand. Forget it. I've never expected to be able to get along with you. I'll be thankful as long as you don't tease me all the time. His gaze shifted away, and he stood there without uttering a single word. Violet framed the painting meticulously, thinking that he had already left. But when she looked up, she saw that he was still there. Why haven't you left? Jackie looked out the window. It's raining. She choked on her own words. You own a car. Why are you afraid of the rain? Then, do you have a car? Violet was stunned for a short while. She then took a glance at the pouring rain outside the window. Are you here to pick me up? He did not say anything. This is impossible. He hates me and still can't get rid of me even after the divorce. So why would he be kind enough to come here and pick me up? She ignored him and moved on with the task at hand. When she returned to her senses again, Jackie had left. And there was an umbrella on her desk. The next day, Maisie and Nolan, who originally planned to leave on the 13th of January, extended their stay in Octavia. After Daisy finished her breakfast, she asked her brothers to accompany her to find Violet. The children had a lot of fun in Octavia, and since it was during their winter break anyway, they could stay for a few more days. However, Jackie could not be seen all morning. When Maisie asked, Thomas replied with a smile, that kid went out in the morning. I'm not sure what he's up to, and I can't care less about him. Nolan peeled an egg for Maisie. Maybe he's busy courting his wife. Maisie was surprised. Is that even possible? He's divorced Violet, and Violet is now his godsister. So what kind of wife is he planning to court? Nolan tilted his head to look at her and sneered. You don't seem to understand a man's thoughts very well. Maisie ate the egg he peeled and kept quiet. Thomas chuckled, picked up the teacup, and took a sip. After the divorce, it's easier for them to get to know each other without the constraints of marriage. Jackie hated Violet only because he was forced to accept the arrangement. Even if Violet was not the partner he got but another woman, Jackie might reject the proposal in the first place. Once prejudice was formed, it was difficult for both parties to understand each other, but once they let go of their prejudice, they would get to know each other from the basics again. Their divorce had never been a bad thing. They were originally a couple that was forced to be together without any love. To put it bluntly, even after the separation of an affectionate couple, both parties would only realize the advantages of the other party that they overlooked when they were still married. What was more, Violet was not any woman. She had the looks, and she had the figure. Despite her bad reputation, the soul wrapped under her shell had always been pure and innocent.